To invite you to join in a conversation that I'd like to have with Ambassador Bogyay about cultural diplomacy. But the first thing I'd ask is maybe if we can all come a little closer, just kind of see empty seats. Hopefully these people will come back. We have a special guest who's actually not on the program, as I mentioned earlier, coming at 12:30, Ambassador Decima Williams. She's the special advisor for the Sustainable Development Goals, Office of the President of the United Nations General Assembly. So she'll be coming in about 15 minutes. So maybe I will use my hammer again. It worked well in Congress the other day with the rowdy group of Democrats and Republicans. But yeah, so now is really just a chance. We have about 15 minutes. I wanted us to benefit from the great experience and also insights of Ambassador Bogyay when it comes to also cultural diplomacy and the arts. There was a lot of conversation, of course, the last few days about global governance, about the United Nations, about the United States, cultural diplomacy as well. But here you really have a chance in the flesh and the blood, someone who built up cultural diplomacy institutions herself. At the time when I was founding and starting the ICD in 1999-2000, you were in London building up your own institution with the London Cultural Institute. And before that, she also has a tremendous experience also in the field of media in Hungary. It's a very impressive CV. So let's jump right to the point. And maybe I will ask you a question that I asked Professor Berghan 2 days ago. Professor Berghan is a professor at Columbia University. I think you may have met him before, Ambassador Bogyay. And I asked him a very simple question to get things started, so I'll ask the same of you. What is cultural diplomacy?
For me, cultural diplomacy, a hope that at least we try not to misunderstand but understand each other. This is for me cultural diplomacy. And of course I can elaborate that, but I look at cultural diplomacy as a very important tool in building bridges between countries, nations, cultures, people, religions. And when I set up the Hungarian Cultural Institute, what you just mentioned, in 1999 in London, in Covent Garden, Maiden Lane, this is like the British Council, right? So this is really the center for Hungarian culture. But I was thinking, here I am in the middle of the world, London, which is symbolically, obviously, an intercultural interface center in the world. I think I have to create a hub. I have to create a space, a culture space, where people from different backgrounds, with different religions, different thoughts can meet. So I wanted to create a culture space, and this is what I did, where people were meeting each other. I think culture diplomacy helps us getting closer towards each other. And as I said, the main point is really that at least we have to try not to misunderstand, but understand each other. I've been a very strong advocate on culture diplomacy, but I have to tell you, this is not so normal. I've been in this journey for, I would say, since the political changes in 1990, officially in that sense for 27 years, when, of course, we became free, we had the chance to talk about these issues freely and openly. And very often I was considered, oh yes, Katalin is talking about culture, okay? Oh yes, she's talking about religion. I was not really taken seriously. And I am very happy that throughout my journey, I managed to prove and show to the circles I've been working with, and here globally in the UN stage as well, that without building long-term bridges, because this is what cultural diplomacy does, these bridges are built long-term between the people and not between the governments or the politicians. We cannot really believe in the future of humanity. And I'm very happy that actually in this cold UN system, which is, of course, you know, very legal and very political and power-based and so on, I'm very happy that I've been bringing every day a bit of this concept. Without today, we know, without culture diplomacy, without putting into the different forms of diplomacy cultural bridge building and understanding. But culture doesn't mean for me, only theater or opera or musical exchanges, but the culture is how we think, how we behave, how we dress, what kind of surroundings we create. So culture is what identifies us. So it is a big mistake not to take it into consideration that if we want to work with people who have got identities, we have to understand their culture. And this is the truth everywhere, in business, in politics, in our everyday life. So that's my answer.
Excellent. As you mentioned earlier, you are not only a member of the advisory board of the ICD, but you're also serving as president of our program for cultural diplomacy and the arts. So I want to ask you a tough question. I was reminded of this a little bit yesterday. We had the chance to visit a live session of Congress where you really saw this division between Republicans and Democrats on a whole variety of issues. And I myself have had a challenge very often talking to many Americans from different parts of the country where I've been told diplomacy is a curse word. In some parts of the United States, you don't mention diplomacy. For them, that's something for wimps. That's something for people running away from the problems. We want action. We want heroes. If there's a problem, we need somebody who can really do something. And just to be provocative, I think, if we think of the global challenges we live in now, we have issues of genocide. We have issues of migration. We have issues of terrorism. We have really very urgent problems around the world. And I find it challenging sometimes to make the case for cultural diplomacy, where you have a lot of individuals who are fed up with diplomacy. They're fed up with talking. They're fed up with exchange. What they really want is action. They want somebody who's going to build walls. They want somebody who's going to have more military. They want somebody who's going to take down the bad guy, quote unquote. And I think there's actually a quote from an album of one of my classmates in college, Lauryn Hill. Now, some of you may have heard of her from the Fugees. Has published a number of albums. And there's a saying, I think it's actually Wyclef who says it in the quote of one of the songs: if you let someone kick you once, they'll kick you once. If you let them kick you twice, they'll kick you twice. If you let them kick you 3 times, they'll kick you 3 times. But if you break off their legs, they ain't going to be kicking anymore. And I'm telling you that now, again, to be provocative. Obviously, I'm very much in favor of cultural diplomacy. Obviously, I'm very much against conflict. But you do have a lot of mentalities, whether it's in Germany with the AfD party or in some parts of the United States or all around the world, you see these extremist groups that really people are gravitating and they say, yes, we need action. We can't talk anymore. We can't blah, blah, blah. How do we explain to some of those audiences the importance of understanding, of trust, of having this fundamental respect for the other at a time when it seems like the world doesn't want to wait anymore, when the world is scared? Michael Moore had the thesis of this culture of fear in the United States. We need to have guns ourselves. We have to protect our own families. We can't wait for the police to come. We need politicians who are really going to fight for us, as heroes, not politicians who are going to talk and this and that. So I'm purposely being provocative. It's a tough question, but I'd really love to hear your feedback in the sense how maybe I and ICD can better articulate the urgency also for things like the arts and cultural diplomacy at a time when you have such very violent challenges, almost in all of the countries that are represented in this room.
Well, first of all, I would like to just clarify that diplomacy is as old as humanity. Diplomacy doesn't mean that we live in a world and we want to do that or that or that. No, diplomacy is a tool. When there is a government, there is we are waiting here for the undersecretary, Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah. So diplomacy is part, especially here in the UN system, as a base of intergovernmental cooperation. So this, if I talk about diplomacy, it is with a purpose. And obviously, we can talk about different types of diplomacy. We can talk about bilateral diplomacy, meaning between 2 countries or 2 states. We can talk about multilateral diplomacy, like the whole UN system, which is what we've been doing here, because we are creating, through diplomacy, a system in which we are arriving with a thought, we are arriving with an interest, and we would like to have the other understand what we would like to tell him or her. So diplomacy is a very important topic, and it depends whether we are tackling it on a bilateral, on an intergovernmental, on a multilateral level. And I think in all these stages, culture diplomacy can be integrated to all these diplomatic affairs. Now, I understand that here in America, probably people are fed up with diplomacy, but frankly, it's not up to the people to decide whether they are fed up with diplomacy or not, because they are not the diplomats. So this is an art form, what diplomats are doing. This is another question, whether the diplomats are doing a good job or not, and then the people who are concerned about different current affairs, political affairs, can question whether the diplomacy which has been done by diplomats could do anything good or not. So I think this is that's why I think it's a very multi-layered question. I know, Mark, you are an American person. You set up this wonderful institute here in New York, but you are also a European by now, has been living in Berlin for so many years, but you are also, because of your work, a global citizen. Diplomacy has got different aspects and different territorial interests and different state and political interests. And this is a tool. When I talk about culture diplomacy, I'm not talking about organizing a concert. I've been a music producer for many, many decades, okay? So I know when I want to produce a concert, what does that mean? If I am doing it using a concert or using an exhibition or using a book or a film for diplomatic purposes, for the purpose of culture diplomacy, I have to have a starting point, why I am doing it. I'm not doing it only so that we could hear the best voice, because then it should, people should go to Lincoln Center or the Festival Hall or to really places where they can be engaged with real music, real concert, real art. If we use art for culture diplomacy as a vehicle, we have to have a message, we have to have an inner thought why we want to do. If I'm like, I've got my wonderful colleagues here, we are now organizing a very special concert where we are working with musicians coming from the Arab world, from America, from Europe, and it will be a great concert. It will be fun. Everyone will love it. But this is not why we are doing it. Why we are doing it is the aftermath of the concert, what the people will think about that, how the people will be affected by that, what the people will be as they will be inspired by the concert. Oh, how interesting that these musical tones can be found in different cultures, in different countries. So when I talk about culture diplomacy, I always have a background idea why I'm doing it. Otherwise, I'm just organizing a fantastic concert, or I am organizing a great exhibition. But when we use culture diplomacy as a vehicle, as a tool for diplomacy, then we have to know what is the message, why we are doing that. And of course, people, who are not diplomats, they don't care. They don't have to know, what we diplomats would like to achieve with the arts as a vehicle of culture diplomacy. What we believe is so important and so influential, but in the long term, they will be affected by that. So if we are doing a good job, it is probably not today or tomorrow, but in long term. That's why I said if we are building the long-term bridges between the people, then we will be seeing the result. And I am very specific. I was brought up in a country which was oppressed by a foreign power, which was run by dictators. I remember very well when I was not a person who felt being free. I became free only in 1990. This is a very short time in freedom. And it's great that today you feel free to say what you want, to feel what you want, to think what you want. I was brought up not to talk about religion because it was forbidden. I was brought up to create a mechanism so that I could resist what I didn't want to follow. Still, I knew if I resisted too much, I would be taken to the prison. You know what I mean? So it is just think, these are complicated questions. And our only chance that time, when it was a communist oppression in my country, was culture diplomacy. Because through culture diplomacy, we had the chance to be connected with other cultures, with other people, with other young people. When we went to the British Council or the American exhibition or the Austrian Culture Institute, or I'm just saying, through that programs, we had a connection to the world. And culture diplomacy is really about this opening up towards the world. So one thing is a profession, which is being a diplomat, and the other thing is being receptive and enjoying or being unhappy with the results of the work of the diplomat. So when we talk about that, we could talk a whole day, but I think this is very important to make the distinction what the diplomats want to use culture diplomacy for, and it has got always something, an aim, why we are doing that, and what is on the other side of this process where the people sit, where you are receiving something. And yes, you can be unhappy with that. And frankly, for me, I'm an outsider. I'm sitting here and sitting like in a movie, watching the whole election story of the United States. I never stayed in the United States while an election. This is an amazing experience. I'm writing my new book. I'm writing, my notes every night because I will forget about that, because it can be the most absurd action, what is happening to us. But this is politics. There is a lot of politics, what we are talking about. Diplomacy, as I call it, the ancient art of building bridges between countries, states, people, this is something different for me.
I completely agree, and if I could just maybe make one point and one proposal, I think as we observe cultural diplomacy today, where can it really help? One contribution I think it can really make is in terms of making it more difficult for extremists, in terms of let's challenge them. The next time someone comes, whether it's from within our own country or in another country, and tries to explain to us that this entire group is all like this, and this entire group is all like that, let's make it more difficult for them by having more exchanges, by having more dialogue, by having more interactions of different groups. My own country you referred to earlier, as far as I know, it's 20%, maybe up to 30% maximum of Americans that have passports. So I think the observation I want to make, or a proposal, I think an exciting opportunity for diplomacy in the next 20 years is to actually get away from diplomats. In the sense, one of the limiting factors, I think, of diplomacy up until now, for the most part, is it's been diplomats talking to diplomats. Most of the limitations of the United Nations, for the most part, I'm generalizing, is it's United Nations officials talking to United Nations officials. if I was a dictator, let's say, and Secretary General of the UN, I would love to require every ambassador. No, it's not, of course, but just as a fantasy, if I could require that every ambassador spends half of their time with the people. You made a very good point to the people. Let's go to Texas. Let's go to Illinois. Let's go to Nevada. Just think of how interesting that would be. The ambassador of Vietnam or the ambassador of Pakistan to sit down in a city hall in Dallas, Texas, and talk about Pakistan with Texans. Or just imagine again for ambassadors, not only UN, to really say, okay, half of your job description is to actually go to kindergartens, to go to high schools, to go to hospitals, to go to prisons.
But we do that.
I know.
We do that.
But not everyone. You do. You're a great example, but not everyone. And because I've had so many conversations, especially ambassadors in Germany that have small embassies, small structures, small staffs, and they complain, we can't host events, etc. And I say, that's an asset, not a liability. The fact that you have a small embassy is good. It means you have to get out. And I think that's perhaps one way of taking something that is vitally important. I mean, diplomacy, in essence, is the alternative to conflict. So, of course, it's more important today than ever. Obviously, it's very difficult for me when I have people telling me, diplomacy is a curse word. But that might be one way of trying to take the next step, as you were saying, that really we can go to the people and work with the people. And that's really what I think is so special about culture diplomacy, especially lowercase culture diplomacy. The logo of ICD is always a small I, a small c, a small d. And that's intentional because, of course, official culture diplomacy, as you know, is very often, from embassies and this and that. Those unofficial forms, through a soccer player, through a rapper, or through a student exchange program, can sometimes be even more effective. So those are, I think, just a few observations where I think there is a lot that can be done. And maybe we can't bring world peace, maybe we can't solve the urgent problems that are there, but I think a very valuable contribution would be to make it more difficult for extremists of any kind by at least having more exposure, more dialogue. The more Palestinians and Israelis I know, it's going to be harder for someone to convince me that all Israelis or Palestinians are like this and this. And I think there a lot of work can be done, and it has to be done, especially as we see the rise in your country as well as in our own of extremists of all kinds.
Absolutely. I totally agree. What I would like to say, just don't forget, diplomacy doesn't equal positive things, okay? So this is not that diplomacy is good in every aspect. You have amazing diplomats who are fueling, let's say, extremism into the world. So it's not that it depends who is the diplomat, what is the intention of the diplomat. So we diplomats are dealing with diplomats, and we know that probably our partners are not thinking the same way, don't want to do the same thing, but that's diplomacy. That's why when all humanity created diplomacy, started to bring, first of all, mi az ajándék? A little gift, okay, to be kind and nice, to have a good supper, and nice, you know what I mean? Just to start a relationship. And they haven't started yet the real thing, why they went to see the person, why they went to another court or visited another king or a landlord or whatever. So diplomacy is a complex issue, and it can be positive, but it can be negative. And this is just as media and journalism is. It can have a positive or a negative effect. So here I want to finish, okay? And I see you at the lunch of the Hungarian mission.